Hi, I'm Bill Kirshner, an Assistant General Counsel with the FLRA's Office of the General Counsel. In this series of videos, the Office of the General Counsel is providing training on collective bargaining, one of the most complex subjects under the Federal Service Labor Management Relations Statute. This series will cover what is included in the scope of bargaining, what represents good and bad faith bargaining, duty to bargain issues, including term, midterm, and an in-depth analysis into change bargaining, addressing both what is a change and what impact is necessary to support the finding of a bargaining obligation. What defenses exist that may modify the duty to bargain, including covered by, contract interpretation, and times when grievances, not ULP, should be pursued. And lastly, remedies when bargaining violations occur. You will soon see that collective bargaining is one of the most complex subjects under the statute. If you do not watch the entire series, you may miss critical information affecting your ability to bargain successfully. Why is bargaining so complex? It's complex because there are three broad factors simultaneously at play in bargaining cases: scope of bargaining, duty to bargain, and defenses to the duty to bargain. Let's explain what each of these mean. First, scope of bargaining addresses what topics are generally included or excluded in the matters a union may be entitled and an agency may be required to bargain. Second, duty to bargain sets out when the duty to bargain arises. Generally, this encompasses term, midterm, and change bargaining. Third, defenses to the duty to bargain need to be examined. Sometimes it appears a matter is within the scope and duty to bargain, but for one of several legal reasons, the union does not have a right and the agency does not have a statutory duty to bargain. This video addresses defenses to the duty to bargain, meaning times when a legal defense exists, even if the matter is otherwise within the scope and duty to bargain. The existence of a valid defense means there is no bargaining obligation, and good and bad faith bargaining standards do not apply. This series introduces terms and concepts the OGC will raise in investigations which help govern the FLRA in adjudicating bargaining disputes. It does not represent legal advice. Now, on to the presentation. The first defense we will examine is the covered by defense. Covered by is a defense to a duty to bargain allegation. An agency is not required to bargain during the term of an agreement over matters that are contained in or covered by the agreement. The authority uses a two-pronged test to determine if the covered by defense prevents additional bargaining. Under prong 1, the FLRA examines if the subject matter of a proposed change is expressly contained or encompassed in the collective bargaining agreement. If the answer is yes, then covered by can be asserted in response to a request to bargain, and when correctly asserted, the covered by defense supports the conclusion that there is no duty to bargain. Under prong 2, the FLRA determines if the subject matter of the change is inseparably bound up with, and plainly an aspect of, a subject covered by the agreement. Again, if the answer is yes, then the covered by defense may be successfully asserted, and the parties will be within the red area where there is no duty to bargain. There are exceptions that may prevent the successful assertion of this defense. For example, if the agency proposes to implement a reduction in force, and the union then demands to bargain, if there is already a negotiated memorandum of understanding, specifically on RIFs, or a contract article on RIFs, under the covered by defense, the agency can assert it fulfilled its duty to bargain, and thus the bargaining is complete. However, prior agreements may include language expressly waiving a covered by defense, or expressly requiring future bargaining. Said another way, if a previously negotiated agreement allows the agency to implement a RIF, it is free to do what the contract expressly permits. That means, after a matter is bargained to agreement, additional bargaining on that issue may not have to occur during the agreement's term unless additional bargaining is required per the agreement. The covered by defense can be used by an agency to establish it has no duty to bargain. Covered by's underlying theory can also be used by a union. If an employer's proposed change differs from an existing agreement, the union can decline to bargain and instead insist on compliance with the agreed upon terms from existing valid agreements. So, how does a party obtain compliance with the contract's terms? Most of the time, the best option is to file a grievance. The statute requires that contracts have grievance and arbitration provisions. The ULP process is not designed to address most issues related to alleged contract breaches. Independent arbitrators have jurisdiction to review and interpret contract terms. There is one exception to the general rule that contract disputes are resolved through arbitration and should not be the subject of ULP charges. The exception applies when a contract provision is repudiated. A repudiation of a memorandum of understanding or a collective bargaining agreement is an unfair labor practice. The authority uses a two-part test to determine if a repudiation occurred. First, the nature of the alleged breach is examined. The breach must be clear and patent to satisfy the first part of the repudiation test. Second, the scope of the agreement is examined. To satisfy the second part, the alleged repudiation must go to the heart of the agreement. Parties to a contract agree to abide by its provisions. Most failures to abide by contract provisions represent breaches that are remedied by filing grievances under contractual grievance procedures. However, some breaches are so significant in nature and scope that they represent a disavowal of the contract terms. These are repudiations of the contract and therefore unfair labor practices. The second defense we will examine is the authority's contract interpretation doctrine. This doctrine addresses when an alleged breach relates to a statutory right which is also included in the contract. When that occurs, the ULP process can be used to adjudicate the dispute. Beware, if your contract expands a statutory right, the OGC will not seek to enforce that expansion. However, if your contract reduces a statutory right, the OGC will review your contract and see if the language waives some aspect of a statutory right. If it does, the contract may narrow the union's statutory right. Under the authority's IRS doctrine, when a statutory right may have been modified by contract terms, these disputes can be reviewed by filing a ULP charge. When an agency asserts the contract supports its refusal to bargain, the authority interprets the contract. The authority's test is whether the party asserting the defense properly interpreted and applied the contract. When a party correctly does this, it does not violate the statute, and therefore no ULP is committed. This doctrine can also apply more broadly to more than just bargaining disputes. Let's look at an example of this. At times, waivers are caused by the application of negotiated contract terms. For example, under the statute, a party has a reasonable amount of time, depending on the circumstances, to demand a bargain. However, parties may contractually define those concepts, including agreeing on time limits to request to bargain. If a contract requires that demands to bargain be made within 14 days of receiving notice of a proposed change, and the union demands to bargain on day 20, the union's request, while possibly made within a reasonable time frame, may nonetheless be untimely, and the union may have waived its right to bargain by failing to comply with the contract. If the contract states demands must be submitted within 14 days, the authority may conclude that the union waived its right to bargain due to its failure to timely submit a demand. Thus, contract interpretation may allow the conclusion that a union waived its right to bargain after an agency asserts the union failed to follow the contract. The third and last defense relates to non-contractual waivers. Sometimes, waivers occur by inaction. For example, if a union fails to timely request bargaining, fails to request a briefing, or fails to request an extension of time, the union may, by inaction, waive its right to bargain that otherwise would have existed had a timely demand been made. A second waiver may occur when, during negotiations, the agency and the union fully discuss the subject and the union consciously yields its right to bargain over that matter. This means, during the contract's term, the union cannot request a bargain over that matter which is not covered by, but is waived. Final thoughts on bargaining. An agency may implement a change if all proposals on the table at the time of implementation are non-negotiable and it is otherwise bargained in good faith. The agency must, however, respond to the union's request to bargain over the proposals, even if all the proposals are non-negotiable. If the agency chooses to implement under these circumstances, then it acts at its peril. If any proposals are later determined to be negotiable, then the agency has committed an unfair labor practice. One final point. Negotiability matters are addressed by filing a petition for review with the authority, and requests for assistance with bargaining impasses go to the Federal Service Impasses panel. These matters are not handled by the Office of the General Counsel, and separate training is needed on those aspects of the bargaining process. This concludes the video describing defenses to the duty to bargain for unfair labor practice charges addressing bargaining. The videos on scope, good and bad faith bargaining, the duty to bargain, and on remedies each include material impacting determinations about bargaining in different situations. For more information, visit us online, and as always, feel free to contact the FLRA for assistance.